we at least substantially allow a degree of autonomy in the running of the local government. Now, as you know, in spite of the 74th Amendment, functions, important functions such as town planning and law and order are mostly not devolved to urban local governments, and devolution of funds and functionaries is even less. So that's the actual ground reality on devolution. Finally, on empowerment, the point made by Devolina earlier on and in the table that I showed, empowering census towns with statutory urban local governments so that they can articulate and deliver their demand for urban infrastructure and services. Also, if we have these statutory urban local governments, they can form a base on which metropolitan governance framework can be built. So now Vaidehi will take over on the metropolitan governance. Sure.
I'd like to thank Dr. Ahluwalia for giving me this opportunity to share some thoughts and to try and understand how the system of metropolitan governance in India actually functions and what are the outcomes. And I'm sure a lot more can be gleaned from the discussion that would follow. So how does one define a metropolitan region in India? The 74th Constitutional Amendment Act provides the definition, and it calls a metropolitan region as having one that has a population of 10 lakhs or more, that comprised in one or more districts and consisting of two or more municipalities or panchayats or other contiguous areas specified by the governor by public notification to be a metropolitan area. The motivation behind defining metropolitan regions in the Act perhaps was to facilitate planning beyond the boundaries of the municipal or the local bodies. Now, this sort of a definition is not what is commonly understood as metropolitan regions. When we talk of metropolitan regions, especially in a more abstract sense, we think of them as a unified market where you have strong economic and employment linkages between the core cities and the periphery of the region. So that sort of an element is not captured in the present definition that we have. But again, we don't even have the data, I believe, to think of capturing such a definition in our context, unfortunately. And the other problem with this definition, I would think, is the discretion given to the state governments in trying to define what a metropolitan region is. There are no objective criteria other than the one that they should have a population of 10 lakh and more. And that sort of gives the government the powers to declare an area or a metropolitan area. It gives them also the power to change the boundaries of metropolitan regions as they feel like. And what is lost also is that there are many regions that perhaps already are functioning as metropolitan regions, but that do not have that classification, and therefore we can't even begin a conversation about metropolitan governance for such areas. Okay, so let's talk economic geography. We've been talking about the contribution of the cities to the GDPs. Well, we also find that the metropolitan regions themselves are contributing substantially to the state GDPs. For instance, we have Mumbai and Bangalore metropolitan regions that are contributing around 35% and 38% respectively to their state GDPs. There's also a substantial contribution in terms of tax revenues. For Mumbai metropolitan region, it contributes 70% to the state and 11% to the national tax revenues. The other, the other interesting phenomenon observed in metropolitan region is the increase in investments and economic activity that is actually taking place on the urban peripheries, that is outside the core cities. There's a study of the 7 largest metropolitan regions of India which finds that the activities and investments have in fact been greater in the peripheries than in the core areas. But the flip side for that is maybe the strict, stringent regulations with regard to real estate and other land use regulations have actually pushed out economic activity from out of the core city. And the added disadvantage of weak urban infrastructure in the peripheries has actually led to increasing costs of investing in the metropolitan regions, because the any sort of development has to, so the private developers maybe would have to invest their own, or find private solutions for say roads and water supply and so on within the urban peripheries and metropolitan regions. uh, so, having looked at what the situation is right now, what would we think of, why does one think of the need for metropolitan governance? It arises from the fact that, there are a lot of public goods and services that local areas require, and each of them have their own distinct characteristics in terms of production and provision. So, for instance, some public goods and services like urban water supply or wastewater treatment or disposal of solid waste are something that enjoy economies of scale, and that would be more efficiently provided at a level slightly higher than that of the urban local bodies. The second common characteristic that some services such as roads displays that of externalities. So, for instance, the action of externalities is actually known as when the action of one agent has an impact on another agent that had nothing to do with this action in the first place. So when you're building roads between two villages, that has implications in terms of, say, even the air pollution, and in terms of how it drives transportation costs and settlements around the area. So these sorts of externalities need to be internalized at a regional level, because at a local level, the local bodies do not take into account the costs of providing these services in terms of the actual social costs. The third reason why you need to think of a metropolitan governance is a simple point of improving municipal coordination and making sure that the functions, that there is good amount of talking, and there's a platform for the various local bodies to come together and thrash out important issues that have implications for better service delivery. The fourth and the fifth again are to do with transport and regional planning, and this is again the way it's derived from the way that we look at metropolitan regions, which is again, as I mentioned earlier, as regions that are unified markets. So unified markets require good and easy and rapid movement of people and of goods themselves. So you need integrated transport planning for that to happen. The additional benefit of having transport planning at a regional level is it helps mitigate air pollution, because you can plan mass rapid transit systems. You can have parking policies in a way that reduce the dependence on cars, and that could actually have a positive impact in terms of reducing your emissions. And finally, you think of regional planning, right? Because you typically have several bodies, some undertaking general purpose municipal provisions, some undertaking special, provisions such as roads, etc., that are involved in service delivery and that are also involved in planning. So there is a need to dovetail all the plans and all these activities. There's also a reason. A need for regional planning to create a strategic vision for the region, so that it attracts private investments and actually leads to sustainable growth and development of the regions. So what has been the Indian experience with metropolitan level coordination? We do not have a separate governance system, but we have some sort of institutions that have tried in some manner to bring about or to undertake some functions at the metropolitan level. We have metropolitan planning committees that were actually mandated by the 74th Constitutional Act. But what has happened is, we all know that many states, the states have not been very enthusiastic in creating MPCs. And where they have been created, such as in West Bengal, in Maharashtra, even in Bangalore recently, they've not worked. there are no, I mean, the key three reasons for why they've not worked would be the fact that they don't have any revenue handles or any dedicated functionaries, in the sense that they're not empowered to carry out the function, which is, the one function of regional planning. Secondly, you see a reluctance by the state government officials to cede power to the MPCs. And thirdly, you already have, urban development or regional development authorities that have occupied the space of regional planning. And so, the idea that you require MPCs does not seem to, be attractive for many state governments. Which brings me to the regional development authorities themselves that have been created since the 1970s, and again quite a few metropolitan regions have them, and they're mainly tasked with the function of regional planning and implementation, though in some cases they also undertake the functions of infrastructure provision. Most of the resource raising powers are through, levying fees and user charges, and also through land sales. But what happens is, although these regional development authorities have to make or prepare and implement regional plans, they do not necessarily have to take into account the other plans that are being made by other planning authorities in the region. So this becomes just another planning agency which has not been tasked with any coordinating, coordinating functions. And since it is also, mostly not, it's never in fact an elected body, but is directly under the urban development departments of the state governments, there is a question of political accountability. Then, given the fact that you require integrated transport for the regions, there have been some recommendations made by the National Urban Transport Policy for the creation of the urban metropolitan transport authorities. Again, some metropolitan regions created them, such as Mumbai, Bangalore, and Hyderabad. But we see that they do not have the necessary technical capacity or the powers to enforce and implement the transport plans. They also do not have adequate representation of the regional authorities or the local bodies, and you see that they are largely populated by state government officials. And the fourth, and perhaps the most weak sort of system for regional development or metropolitan governance, is the role played by intermunicipal cooperation. We do not find cases where ULBs are voluntarily coming together and exploiting economies of scale to provide certain public goods and services. But that may be an issue of capacity, or that may be an issue of will. I'm not very sure. We do have one or two, perhaps, that have been very successful in the voluntary cooperation, and that have successfully provided the local services. One is the one mentioned here is the STEM water authority in the Mumbai metropolitan region. But again, there has not been a scalable or a replicable, it's not just been scaled or replicated in other areas. So I would like to invite Dr. Ahluwalia to, given this sort of a situation that we have, what could be the way forward, if you could take the floor.
So as we look for the way forward, going back to urban governance and then coming to metropolitan governance, first and foremost, if we want our cities to deliver urban public services in a financially and environmentally sustainable manner, this is needed not just for better quality of life in our cities, but also because we have to have our cities acting as the principal engine of growth in the decades to come. Second point looking forward is that empowering urban local governments politically will help ensure better delivery of public services with accountability. Now, this may not happen tomorrow, this may not happen 5 years from now, but this is bound to happen, maybe in 10 years, maybe when, but because there is no other way